And I'm not going to ask you to come up and defend them because I'm going to critique them. And I hope no one gets their feelings hurt. But I'm going to be just point out things and questions that I have when I looked at them. I looked at them this morning and last night, and I did come up with some questions that I wanted to, or clarifications that I need. So if I do have a question, I'll expect you to answer it. But otherwise, I'm going to go through them and talk about what I see. And then if we have time, hopefully you'll have a chance to huddle as a team based on my comments and kind of discuss what you might want to do, in response. So take notes if your team is up here, and even if it's not your team, some of the points I might make might apply to your work as well. And some of them are just general comments. I kind of think of this as more or less a teachable moment. So if your presentation sounds like I didn't like it or I thought it was terrible, I probably thought it was fine, but I'm concentrating a little bit more on, let's say, the critical side rather than giving you a lot of praise. So don't get your feelings hurt. So this one, I like the simplicity of this graphic. I mean, I can very easily see there's a title and who the team is. But I have a lot of trouble with this diagram. And the problem I normally have with diagrams is that I don't understand what some of it means. I don't know why there's this red circle around it. That contributes nothing to the information that I'm trying to glean. In fact, it confuses the information. I don't know why the client is slightly smaller than the other circles. You have 3 circles that are pretty well the same size, and then suddenly one is smaller. Why? Is the client a smaller group? Is it less important? And why are these 2? Well, I guess they aren't the same color. They're actually slightly different. This one's yellow, this one's green. But most importantly, this is not hierarchy. There's no hierarchy here. The hierarchy I get from this is the client is least important, and the programmer, and I don't, when you have a diagram like this, which is a circle, and you have circles within circles, there's no hierarchy there. Other than, I guess, the client is at the center, which is a kind of hierarchy, but it's not hierarchy. And I'm not sure what this diagram is actually saying, other than the client has some overlap with the programmer, architect, and consultant. That's the only thing I can get out of this. Now, this diagram, and a lot of this is discussing diagrams. When I looked at this diagram, I had a problem with this part up here. And maybe I didn't understand the thinking here. Initial phase, another phase, now we're in phase 1, another, and so on. So there's work phase 1, work phase 2, work phase 2. You're mixing apples and oranges, because if these are work phases, work, isn't selecting the architect work? Isn't selecting the programmer work as well? All this says is that all members of the integrated team communicate. And that's not really work, that's sort of a general protocol. So I tried to understand the distinctions between what's sort of a initial secondary versus work, and what's meant by work. And the other thing I had a bit of a problem with this diagram is it suggests it's just this simple linear, this step, then you finish this step, then you go to this step, then this step, then this step, this step. It's a model of the process that I think is oversimplified. I think that It's actually much more complex. And I know you have a diagram later on that illustrates that. I don't really mind this stuff, but if you're going to put your energy and time into something looking for these, that time would have been better served really thinking about what this is really saying. And it's not the design process, is it? Is it the pre-design process? Because none of this is yet about design. So I'm really getting at being careful, really looking at what you've got and asking yourself, is there something that is here that doesn't seem quite right? Now, I don't get the relationship. I guess the relationship between this slide and the previous slide is that there was that one box that was this box here. And now we're building on that box, but it's not very easy to figure that out unless you had that little flowchart diagram, previous diagram here, and you highlight this box, the box that was about integrated team, and then you can see, okay, that was kind of an index or an overall table of contents almost, and now we're blowing up one of the boxes and we're just going into more detail about it. So there's a logical build-up in the presentation. Remember, you're making this presentation to what amounts to like the equivalent of your client that maybe doesn't really know very much about all this, and you're trying to educate them. So you don't want to confuse them. Now, I see there's no distinction here between all of these players, and they all have an arrow coming out from the design team to the particular actor in the system. And what you can't see here is that there's a bubble around each of these, and this one overlaps with this one overlaps with this one overlaps with this one, and so on. Because they're made to overlap, you look at that and say, okay, the project manager only overlaps with the mechanical engineer and the commissioning agent, but not with any of these people. Because you made a point of overlapping each one of these with the next one. So it sends kind of the wrong message. It sends the message that, like, the landscape architect only interacts with the building owner, operator, and the architect only interacts with the landscape architect and the interior designer. So I think the diagram, again, is a little bit misleading. Now, that was about the participants, the actors. The next one is about the process. And this one has a lot of interesting loops. And I assume each one of these is an activity or an action and so I started to look for it and I said, okay, it must start over here because I'm looking at this large arrow. So this is sort of in this directional piece because this doesn't connect to that. This sort of flows this way and it stops here. But then where does that go? Does it go in here? Because there's no directional arrows here, we don't know if this only flows. And these are targets. So they don't seem to be the same as the activities. So it must mean that, and I'm trying to figure it out, it must mean that these targets feed into the activities. So but this starts off by reviewing the functional program, which is assuming that there is one, that there's already been a program written that describes the way the place is going to operate. And then from there you assemble the team and identify missing specialties. You hold a kickoff design workshop, but is this really design? And how did you get to design that quickly? Because here you're developing your concept, structure, building envelope. This is really into design here. So all of the pre-design is really like here, this one piece here, because you're already doing a design workshop here, working with the site, developing your concept, going through the design process of structure, enclosure, daylighting, campus systems. So I was looking for diagramming the pre-design and programming process, which is all contained in this one. And speak up if I'm wrong, you know, defend yourselves. That's fine. I won't, you know, I won't take it badly. Anybody want to speak to that from the team?
It's just that how we considered the first hour of going to develop concept design to be the whole program, the whole pre-design process. And then after HVAC, electrical, structural systems come in, they'll come back and they'll...
This is where pre-design.
Yeah, that's where it ended.
So it's this.
Yes.
Okay. And what was this doing?
That's just a point made that this is a green building.
But are these inputs? And why are the inputs the same for everybody? Is
Well,
input to this much greater and more important like here than it is here, for example?
well, it's just that all the arrows pointing to that center spot, that's what they're contributing to.
So there's arrows here?
Yeah, there's really arrows there.
Well, there are no arrows, right?
No, but that's the intention.
Okay. All right. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that when you're diagramming something like this, be very, very careful and very self-critical and stand back and say, what is there here that is not going to be understood? Or now this part was good, where you went through and you said what all the players are doing. But I think there's some unrealistic things in here. The client, yes, is responsible for hiring the architect. And to meet the programmer. But where did the programmer come from? Did the programmer get hired by the client at the same time as the architect? There's kind of a missing part here. And to talk about the space requirements. And are there already space requirements? So part of this seems like there's some steps missing. And now the architect, this seems to be that the architect is the programmer. Because the architect is meeting with the client to ascertain wants and desires for the project, meeting with the programmer. Where did the programmer come from? To understand space requirements and their function. So now the architect is meeting with the faculty and students, and then meeting with the IDT. Who's the IDT?
The integrated design team.
The integrated design team. To understand if early design proposals are feasible or not. Okay, so let's look at what the programmer's assignment is. To meet with the client to figure out what was his requirements for the project. Some of this, you also need to carefully proofread everything you write, because there's some grammatical problems here. His requirements for the project is requiring spaces and, so I'll read that out loud. Is to meet with the client to figure out what his requirements for the project is, requiring spaces and square footage. You know, first of all, it's not a sentence. to meet with the architect and discuss his ideas of the project and get a better feel of his concept. So it seems like the building has a concept and it's been kind of a preliminary schematic kind of design before the programmer gets involved. Is that right?
Not really. The programmer gets involved with the client. Like you said, we missed a step. The client is supposed to hire the programmer first, and then hiring the architect second. And then after the client and the programmer develops a program, then the architect comes in and develops from that point on.
Okay. Yeah, that doesn't come across. So this is referring back, I assume, to that original diagram that said task 1, task 2, and so on. That's sort of your master diagram. So all members of the team, and yours, that's the integrated design team?
Yeah.
Okay. Which is spelled programming wrong. Have the client review the process of space program and have him input any ideas to the architect and programmer about any changes to the budget or plans of the building. Well, other than the English, it doesn't make sense. The client, the process of space programming, what does that mean, programming?
Yeah, that's the.
I really didn't get that whole thing.
Well, after the architect develops something based on the program, he would bring it back to the client for him to review it.
Why didn't you just say that? Who wrote this? Did you write it?
No, I didn't write it.
Okay. You're taking the brunt. You're sitting in front and center. The architect, that's you, right?
Yeah.
We got to connect with the contractor to talk about the site construction materials that will be incorporated into the building. That's reasonable. The architect sits down in an integrated design team with the contractor early in the process to discuss site construction materials, those kinds of issues, which might impinge on the design, the way your design evolves.
Right.
So I like that. That's good. The programmer reviews with the architect dealing with changes to the program or changes made to the design. Develop a BIM model. So I'm still having a problem with this. When does this design occur? Does it occur almost a little bit before and then programming and then more design, or is programming? None of your diagrams really clarify that.
Programming occurs. Yeah, I see that now. Programming occurs first, and then we begin the design. And during that design process, we develop a BIM model to be reviewed by the client.
Yeah.
And then we would revise it depending on what the integrated design team says, and then develop a new BIM model.
Right. I like what you say. I have more problems with what's been written. Final review of the design phase. Is that really the end of design, or is it?
End of pre-design.
It's the end of pre-design.
Yeah.
Right. Review final changes to, I'm going to say pre-design. See if anything is left out. Gather all the information. Prepare it into a document for final process. You guys need to rewrite this. So it's okay to have a third submission.
Okay.
Because you do want to have something that you can be proud of. Yeah, I mean, you're graduate students, and there's a certain standard that has to be met. I like this diagram a lot because what it does is it combines the timeline with the various tasks. I'm surprised there's no overlapping here. Like there's a little bit down here. And I'm surprised that it looks like that you didn't take advantage of this diagram to indicate sort of at what point is there what I would call a deliverable. This is a duration of task. And it's a bit suspicious that each one corresponds to a week, and that they're all equal amount of time required. And so I think this is an oversimplification of what really would go on. And I would think that some of this stuff would occur while this is going on, and some of this, you know, the budget, I said last time, has been given to you. The budget was already allocated by the legislature and the universities. Process of allocating money for capital projects. So this whole step here really isn't part of this equation. You already know that your budget is, let's say, $10 million, because that's established right up front. So one of the things you might be doing is evaluating whatever you're coming up with, let's say at a conceptual design level, and especially if you modeled it, evaluating it to see if it could be built for the budget. So it's really checking the work as you go along to see if it fits within your budget limitations. The space programming is way down here, and you've got all this other activity. This is just meetings, and I assume the meetings don't only occur in this first week. There's no other meetings. Meetings, I would think, would occur intermittently. Maybe at the end of each thing here there would be a meeting, maybe with the programmer, the architect. The architect would have meetings, different points. So this whole thing here really doesn't work this way at all. I think meetings are, the research phase, yeah, I could buy that, where you would research certain things early, and then you would research some other things later on, because that's when they're needed, and that's when you know what it is you should be researching. Because you don't know up front all of the issues that are going to need to be researched. Some of those issues will come out of meetings, some of the issues will come out of the programming down here, and so on. So the format is a good format. It's just not really been thought through in a kind of a integrated, thoughtful way about what really this represents. Because, you know, this is this week. Is this the beginning date or the end date of the week? Up here.
That's the beginning date.
That's Thursday, right?
Right.
Why
I think it
Thursday?
is. Why?
I'm sorry if some of these questions seem kind of silly. But
It's just an arbitrary day.
That was
We
the
start.
first day we met,
uh-huh.
so I just added a day there.
Okay. And so the 4th is what day of the week? Another Thursday?
No, it's not a Friday.
That's a Friday. But these boxes are the same length, I think. Yeah, I'm being picky now. Okay. I like this part, where you actually list what is going to be due. These are your deliverables. So, so does that mean have the research on what we plan to have in the new building? Is there going to be a document? Is there going to be a product? Is there going to be something that, what are your plans in terms of recording this? And how can you know all of the things that you're going to have in the building by sometime next week? Because the programming is down here. You know, this is a big chunk of the work. This should take up most of the semester, figuring out what the nature and content and spirit and so on the new building should have. And it's very much tied in with not just the space program, and how you arrange the spaces. That's a very limited idea about how to design with programming. That this assumes that you end up with a menu of spaces and you arrange the spaces, and that's something to do with the design. But I think there's a lot more in here. What we plan to have really becomes kind of the key phrase. And how do you determine that? It's not that simple. And I was really glad to see the sources. That's one of the most important things I was looking for. So, I'm going to go to the next one. You guys want to, that team? Anybody else in the team want to say anything? Tomorrow? Finally, anybody? Will I get the next one set up? You don't?
Well,
Mhm.
well, one of the things we were trying to push for was looking beyond the older design process and looking towards the newer model.
Yeah.
So we tried to emphasize that approach in some of the tasks and some of the processes.
I can't get this thing to. Is there a person here who's much more proficient at working with a Mac than I am? Which probably would be everybody, but one person who's a real Mac person?
I'm not on
Somebody
Mac.
who wants help.
Who's a Mac
I
Pro?
need help.
Who's a Mac Pro?
Who's a Mac? Avery.
I don't have a Mac, but I'll help you.
Okay, well, this is something Andrew Kim tried to do, and he can't do it, so you gotta go. I'm trying to slide this over one thing, and I'm trying to make the screen bigger.
You're looking on the wrong side. It's on the left hand side.
Okay, Kyle, come here. I won't hold it against you. Yeah, but I still don't, it's still cut
He
off.
wants the document to fill the screen, not the.
Can you download it?
Well, actually.
Press on the link in the document. No, exit out.
You want this block set?
No, I want to be able to get all the way over here,
Yeah.
because this is where I download it.
Yeah, I think you downloaded it. I'll see if you can. We'll put it into the video document.
There you go.
Now you can make it larger by clicking that.
Okay. Is Travis here? No? Anybody on the team here? Ah. Of course. You know, I like this graphic, but there's no explanation of what it is. Well, I know what it is. It's just that no one else would. If this was, you know, being presented to like a potential architect or a potential programmer or somebody, then it wouldn't hurt to just, you know, have a little text box that says existing school of architecture building. And this is a good diagram, the kind of diagram I like, because it's simple, straightforward, there's not any extraneous information, except, I don't know what these are telling me.
They're all connected to each other for the three designs.
But isn't it,
All connected.
isn't that already
Yeah.
being done here? That does it, right? So this is kind of extraneous.
No, this connects with each other.
And because right now, this looks like you're putting more emphasis on the programmer and the architect and the contractor, which is probably true, but, and what this doesn't tell me, because there's no title, is this the contractual arrangement or relationship? Is this the protocol of the information flow relationship? You know, what is it really? What,
No, really the client slash user is in charge of everything basically, but the trust is also connected to the architect, also connected to the programmer, and also the
I know, but connected what, legally, like contractually?
in the research and
I think if they had a title that said maybe contractual relationships, if it had a title that said, and why are these all yellow and this one's blue?
the main person for the client user.
So the client user, Travis, who's not here, he hires these people, right? And he supervises them and he manages them.
Yes.
Okay. I would have to read that in, but it doesn't say that. This is a really good diagram in a number of ways, because it talks about the role of each of these actors in the programming process. So, but it does a couple of things I'm not that crazy about. It repeats the role of, there's all this text, which is the same font, the same size, and this part here is repetitive. Role for programming process, role for programming process, role for, and then the really important information is this part. This is what they do, and this is the title. Now, the other part of this diagram that is implied here that maybe you didn't intend is that there's a directional flow here. Because this is sort of an arrow that's been truncated. And maybe the arrow is meant to overlap. But that seems to be an additional bit of unnecessary confusion. This could just be very simply be the title of the whole diagram could be the role of each participant in the programming process, and then it would be client, user, programmer, architect, contractor, and it would just list bullet, both bang, 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 bang. So, again, and I like the fact that the source has been identified. Edith Cherry's book, which is in the library. And it's a very good book, kind of a general textbook on programming. So, Research School of Architecture. Now, if we ignore the School of Architecture part, and let's call it research, this would be researching. This is almost like you can't set up goals and objectives without doing a lot of research here. And I assume this is just the goals and objectives that the client has. Is that right?
Yes.
So the client's goals and objectives, which may not be the same as the architect's goals and objectives or the programmer's goals and objectives. Gather relevant information, identify strategies, determine quantitative requirements, and summarize the program. Now, I know in Edith Cherry's book, she talks a lot about qualitative programs as well, but I don't see where the qualitative part. And so this, again, is a very linear process. You start out with the client tells you what their goals are, you in order to meet the client's goals, you collect information appropriate to the client's goals, you identify strategies for achieving those goals, and then you presumably develop the space program based upon that, and you summarize it in a document. Now, what is kind of missing here is a lot of other things that might be kind of built into this gathering relevant information, because the question is, what would be considered relevant? Is it, and who is doing all this? Is this the programmer? Is that what you're saying? Okay. So again, it could have a title saying programming process by programmer. And this one takes that research, the first box, research the School of Architecture, and breaks it down as to what is meant by that, which I like. I like the fact that you have the kind of the master diagram, and then you have the detailed diagram. So research the school and other universities for comparison. So that's looking at comparables, precedents. Identify types of spaces frequently used, and who's doing it. Over here, it's the client programmer and the architect. So obviously the architect is on board right at the beginning.
Yes.
And that wasn't really clear from before. It seemed client programmer architect, and then identify space criteria, square footage per person for those spaces. Identify relationships between spaces, ratio of net assignable to gross square footage, identify site requirements, identify the mechanical. So, what we have here is the very traditional, standard sort of basic run-of-the-mill programming process that's been in place for 40 years, where you go through in this kind of linear fashion, and you're really trying to identify a list of spaces and their square footages. And I contend that's an important part, but it's only a part of programming. So I think it's a little bit limiting. This will not very likely create any innovation. This will give us a functional building where we have the rooms we need, but maybe there's nothing that makes it special or unique. So this is now the second box in the diagram, establishing goals and objectives. You organize your goals, form an image. I'm sure that's an not an form and image goals. Okay, I got it. Aesthetic and psychological goals. Okay, there's maybe a really interesting aspect to that process. The client, programmer, architect, contractor. I don't know if the contractor would be involved too much in that. Functional goals, major functions, how many accommodated. Time goals. I don't know about the stay on pace. That doesn't really fit in here. Management goals to work together. That's another kind of thing like the stay on pace. That's sort of mixing in what your team needs to be doing with what the team is doing. This is the way a team should do it, and this is what they should be doing. So, what happened to the word objectives? And what is the difference between a goal and an objective? Do you know the difference?
The goals are like what the client / user wants sort of like the end product, while the objectives are things that you need to reach the end
Well,
product.
normally the understanding of goals and objectives is that the goals are sort of your larger
Mm-hmm.
aspirations, and the objectives are how you achieve those goals.
Mm-hmm.
And then under that are tactics and other kinds of things. So now we're into the next box, gather the relevant information. I really like this format. I think that's a good idea, where you then provide a further breakdown. So the relevant information is coming from the faculty, user, and students, and maintenance people. I like the fact that you included maintenance staff. Equipment's necessary for the activities. Space criteria, whether it's per person or per unit. Design criteria that affects access, daylight, acoustics, accessibility, and so on. Existing licensing or policy standards. I'm not sure what that is getting at. Now, I know that's in the cherry diagram, but I don't think it's really that relevant here. Identify energy usage requirements. This is your energy budget and so on, which is good. Locate site analysis. Locate the site. We have the site. We don't have to go through a site location, zoning, or any of that kind of stuff. So most of this is not really required in this project. And so here's another one of these bubble diagrams that create so many problems. So identify strategies. Now, are these strategies for achieving your objectives or the goals? Or
The goal, the final.
so is function and flexibility the same order of thing? Are they the same type of thing? And flow and phasing? So you're mixing things like phasing is how you run the project. Function is what you're trying to accommodate. Flexibility is a feature of the design, perhaps. Level of access. So I don't really get the diagram. Some of these wouldn't flexibility overlap with function and flow. I'm not sure what flow means, and so on. So it's a mixture of things that don't really belong in the same diagram. And I'm going to try and finish this quote. These are the quantitative requirements. Net assignable square feet, which is good. The gross square footage, the things. So I don't know how you know this without a design. I mean, there could be a goal for efficiency for the building, like 70% net assignable to gross or something, net to gross. This is where architects get really upset with programmers, because programmers set unrealistic efficiency goals that tie the hands of the architect to do what some people think is the architectural part, which is the gross part, this part here, which has to do with lobbies and all kinds of things which are not the actual space that's being used for a function. And here's another circular diagram. Summarize, review, assemble, and I don't get it. Is there an entry point? And you're just summarizing it. Is this the whole program? Does it start here and you start here? Or you assemble the program, this is where you start, you assemble the program, and then you summarize it, and then you review it, and then but then you assemble it again? There's a lot of good diagrams. It's just the content of the diagrams confuses me in some cases. This is what this is already last week, right? So this is this week and next week. So this is a great diagram because it takes each period week by week and says, here's what we're doing this week, here's what we're doing this week. And some of these are 2-week duration, some are 1 week. And the task numbers relate to that initial diagram, which I had problems with. And some of these, in here, the loop back doesn't really makes sense, because here you're really talking about, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, and with filled in here might be might be taking something here forward, or something back here forward into here. But this is where I would really like to see a clear description of what the deliverable is. What is the product that comes out of this? What's the product that comes out of that? Not just the task, but what is the product of that? So I only got through 2, I guess because I was too picky. But go back to your own presentation. Think about some of the comments I made. Think about whether they apply to yours. I don't want you to keep working on this process plan forever, but I do want you to go back and make it into something that you can really use as a tool for working through the rest of the semester. Now, the final thing I want to say is I've been looking for your stuff on the group section of Blackboard, and a couple of teams are using it. Ian in particular, and Alvaro. And I think, for example, this is the file exchange section, and this is where Jenna and Craig have been sharing with the group. I think that's right, isn't it? Various things that they're working on. I highly urge each team to take advantage of this aspect of Blackboard as a working system for sharing material, for staying in touch, whether you're using the file share exchange, whether you're using the blog feature, whatever part you decide as a group. Yeah, Chris.
We use, is it fine if we use Google Docs? We do the same thing on there, we chat, and it tells us all the revisions that we made, and we get emails every time somebody changes something.
Yeah,
But it's not.
I know, but
Yeah.
I can view
Okay.
this, and I can be part of this,
Yeah.
and I can keep track. I guess I could do that with your Google Docs if you add it to your group.
Yeah, if you add it to, you see everything on there.
But this is what I was hoping people would do.
Okay.
It's not because I want to spy on you, but I check it every so often to see if you have something you want me to contribute, or if there's some dialogue we need to have, or, make it a working system. So Ian, how did you use it? Same way? Or
I started, we were going to try it. We've been using Dropbox to exchange files just quicker for all. I mean, we have it. But I think we're trying to put primary files on there and just compile them.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
see.
And Jerome, you guys put some video on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing you can do. You can, and then your team members can go to that and see it. So hopefully, all of the teams will start doing that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through all your work plans, and I'm going to extract from that what you are going to deliver, say next week, or maybe by the end of this week. I'm just going to see what, and it's going to be hard because not very many of you had date-specific deliverables. You didn't say, on this and this day, we're going to have this task completed, and it's going to be in this form. But I'm going to have to try and work out something like that because I want to hold you to your schedules. And I'm going to expect, when you say you're going to have a product, I'm going to expect to see the product. Even if I only see it on here, and we don't, share it as a class, but I see that you've done it. I can check it off, say, okay, you're on task. Because a big part of programming is managing the process, because it gets very complicated and it requires a lot of discipline to stay on task and to complete it, especially if you've got a lot of other demands being placed on you from other classes and studios and things like that. So that's basically what I'm expecting from you guys. And again, anytime you have an issue, question, problem, let me know. Okay,
Mhm.
all right.